Enroll your child for the manifested e-learning platform and see their grades grow tremendously. These videos can be downloaded to a laptop for offline viewing or viewed from a smartphone in a course-friendly format.
Hello learners, welcome to Manifested Online Classes. I'm your teacher, Masimboya. So in the previous lesson, we discussed about the transitive verbs. I told you that we have two types of verbs in regards to objects. We have the transitive verbs and the intransitive verbs. We had finished the transitive verbs, talking about them. We said that the transitive verbs are those verbs that always require an object for the sentence to be complete. That is, the action that is performed by the subject is always affecting somebody or something. Therefore, that somebody or something that is being affected has to be mentioned. And when it is mentioned, it becomes the object of the sentence. I'll not go back to that because I also gave an assignment which I hope has been done. And also, before you start this video, please make sure that you complete the assignment from the previous lesson, and also make sure that you understood what we had discussed previously. I'm going to get started with the intransitive verbs. As you could imagine, the intransitive verbs are obviously the opposite of the transitive verbs. So everything that we said in regards to the transitive verbs is going to be opposite when it comes to the intransitive verbs. For example, we already mentioned that the transitive verbs always require an object. That is, the action that is performed by the subject is always affects something or somebody. And that somebody or something must be mentioned. But then, when it comes to the intransitive verbs, these verbs do not require an object because the action that is performed by the subject does not affect anybody. Let me write that one out for you. So, unlike the transitive verbs, which always require an object, the intransitive verbs do not require an object because the action done or performed by the subject does not affect anything or anyone. So that of course means, sorry about this. That of course means that the intransitive verbs, unlike the transitive verbs where we said mostly the sentence must have a subject plus a verb plus an object. For the intransitive verbs, the sentence can simply just be the subject and the verb. Let me give an example of such a sentence. For example, you can say a sentence like, the boy laughed. In this sentence, the boy is the subject, laughed is the verb, and that sentence is actually complete. You do not need to add an object to make this sentence complete. Therefore, that means that laughed here is actually an intransitive verb. I could also give another example. We have a sentence like, the dog barked. So we have the dog, which is the subject, barked is the verb, and that sentence, of course, is actually complete. This sentence does not require anything else for it to communicate. Therefore, we can conclude and say that the verb barked is actually an intransitive verb. Also, it is not all the time that the intransitive verbs are going to follow this order, that a sentence only has a subject and a verb. So unlike the transitive verbs where we said the work of the object is to signify us or to tell us the person that is affected by the action performed by the verb, the intransitive verbs, whatever comes after the intransitive verb, the work of that section that comes after the intransitive verb is to give us more details pertaining the action. And those things that come after that verb, we refer to them as adverbials. You remember we talked about the different types of adverbs that we have. We said we have adverbs of manner, adverbs of place, adverbs of time, and those adverbs answer different questions in a sentence. Therefore, we can say that, let me use this one for the sake of emphasis. Sentences sentences with intransitive verbs can have only two parts. However, in other cases, they have more than two. So when we say that they have only two parts, the two parts there, we mean they only have a subject and a verb. Like here, the boy laughed, the dog barked. That sentence. This verb is an intransitive verb. This sentence only has two parts. I've also mentioned that, however, in some other cases, the sentence can have more than two parts. So we can actually say the boy laughed loudly. Loudly is still not an object, but instead loudly answers the question, how did the boy laugh? He laughed loudly. Therefore, loudly becomes an adverb. So what I'm trying to drive at is the fact that the sentences that have intransitive verbs can have more than just two parts, like we have seen here. So I've said whatever comes after the verb, like for example here I've put loudly, is what we call them adverbials. So after the verb, we can have adverbials, that is adverbs. I hope you remember the types of adverbs that we talked about. Or we can actually have a prepositional phrase, and we can also have a clause. I'm going to give examples of sentences using all those three things so that you do not get confused. So let me give examples of sentences so that we can look at them. So examples of sentences. The first one, we will not wait because it is late. And then we could have another sentence, she went to the market. And then number 3, he walked slowly. Look at those sentences. The first one we have, we will not wait because it is late. The second sentence reads, she went to the market. And the third sentence is actually, he walked slowly. I want us to look at those sentences, to look at the structure of those sentences and point out which is the subject, which is the verb, and what exactly comes after our verb. So let's start with the first sentence. Our first sentence, we is the subject here. And then will not wait. All this is actually a verb. Will is a modal auxiliary verb, and then not here has been used to make to show negation, or to make this sentence actually a negative sentence. So we will not wait. So this is an auxiliary verb, and this is actually the main verb. And then we have this section that comes here because it is late. This is what we refer to as a clause. remember in Form 2, you talked about the different types of clauses that we have in English. You talked about the subordinate clause and the main clause or the independent clause. So actually, because it is late, this is actually a subordinate clause because it cannot stand on its own. But what I want you to take note of is the fact that wait here is actually an intransitive verb because it does not require an object for it to communicate. And then what comes after wait is actually a clause. This clause is just completing this sentence. And then we can go to the next sentence. She, of course, she's the subject of our sentence. Went is a verb. And then to the market actually is a prepositional phrase. Most of the students actually always confuse, and most of them actually think that the market or to the market should actually be an object. We say to the market is a prepositional phrase because for one, a prepositional phrase is always, it always begins with a pronoun. It is preceded by a preposition, sorry, not a pronoun. It is always preceded by a preposition. This prepositional phrase of ours has been preceded, or it starts with a preposition which is to, and then it always contains a noun. And our noun here is, it always contains a noun or a noun phrase. So the market is actually a noun phrase. But because it has started with a preposition to, this one becomes a preposition of phrase. I hope this is clear. This is a preposition of phrase, it is not an object. Therefore, our verb here is automatically an intransitive verb. Let's look at the third sentence. He becomes the subject, walked becomes the verb, and then slowly becomes, this is an adverb because it is telling us, it is answering the question, how did he walk? He walked slowly. I hope we are together. Because you talked about the 5 types of adverbs. These ones you discussed in Form 1 and you also discussed in Form 2 again, and we'll still discuss them again in Form 3 at that time. So this one is not an object, but rather it's actually an adverb. So let me give another example to make this clear. You could have a sentence like, we will wait patiently. So here, we, of course, becomes the subject. Will is a modal auxiliary verb, but in this sentence, it is actually the main verb. So this is the verb. Then patiently, of course, is an adverb. As you've seen, the intransitive verbs mostly are followed by other parts of speech which are, they're followed by other things which are actually not objects. We've said they can be followed by a clause, a preposition of phrase, an adverbial phrase, or just an adverb. Therefore, we can just conclude by saying, we can say the intransitive verbs are not followed by nouns or pronouns that are objects in sentences. Instead, they are followed by words or phrases that answer the questions how, where, when. Or when we talk about the questions, when I mentioned here that they are followed by phrases or words. For example, here, this is not a phrase, this is actually a word, but it's actually an adverb. Here, to the market is actually a preposition of phrase. So unlike the transitive verbs that are always followed by either nouns or pronouns that are actually the objects in a sentence, meaning that they are receiver of the action in a sentence, the intransitive verbs are followed by words or preposition of phrase that seek to answer either of these questions. So we've come to the end of knowing the end of the intransitive verbs. I hope from now henceforth you can actually tell when a verb is used transitively or when it is actually used intransitively. However, there's something that I want you to take note of before we move on, that there are some verbs that are unique. There are some verbs that can be used both transitively and intransitively, meaning they can be used without an object and they can actually be used without an object. I'm going to give examples of sentences. Let's look at these sentences. First, let's identify the verb. So the verb here is drove and drove again. Here it's watched and watched. But those verbs have actually been used differently in every sentence. Let's start with the first sentence. Wekesa drove carelessly. Here, carelessly is actually not an object. Carelessly here is actually giving us more information about answering the question how. How did Wekesa drive? Wekesa drove carelessly. Therefore, carelessly here is actually an adverb. Therefore, what type of a verb is this? How has this verb been used? This verb has actually been used intransitively because it actually does not take an object. So this one then we move on to the next sentence. Wekesa drove the bus to school. Wekesa here becomes our subject. And then drove, of course, becomes the verb. And then the receiver of the action, what was driven to school, the bus. Therefore, the bus becomes the object in this sentence. I hope now you can see that the verb is the same, drove. In the first sentence, the verb has been used intransitively. Now, in the second sentence here, drove actually has an object, which is the bus. So we can say that now, in this sentence, it has actually been used transitively. In this sentence, we've seen that now the same verb drove is actually used transitively because it is actually followed by the noun bus, it is followed by the noun phrase the bus, which is actually the object in the sentence. Let's go to the other sentence. The students watched the scary movie. The students become the subject, watched becomes the verb, and then the scary movie is a noun phrase which represents the object because it answers the question, what did the students watch? They watched the scary movie. And then it is the receiver of the action. It is what the students watch. Therefore, in this first sentence, this verb here has actually been used transitively. I hope you're following. And then in the next sentence, the teacher watched as the students carried their chairs from the library. Watched is our verb. The teacher becomes the subject, watched becomes the verb, and then as the students carried their chairs, this is actually a clause. Therefore, because this is a clause, the verb watched here has actually been used intransitively. Sorry. Those sentences, I was giving those sentences so that you can see that sometimes a verb can be used. There are some unique verbs. It is not all verbs. There are some unique verbs that can be used both transitively and intransitively. I've not exhausted them. I've just given examples so that I show you how possible that is. So it is still up to you to go and research. Then something else that I should also mention in regards to intransitive verbs is the fact that unlike we said that the transitive verbs can be, you can change the sentence from its active voice to the passive voice. But for these ones, you cannot change a sentence because let's look at a sentence like, we will not wait because it is late. We do not have an object. If we do not have an object, there is no way of changing a sentence from the active to the passive voice. Because remember, with the passive voice, the object, the thing that was the object in the active voice becomes the subject. Therefore, if we have no object, we cannot change a sentence. So that is something else that you can use. That is another criteria that you can use to identify intransitive verbs. That the sentences that have intransitive verbs cannot be changed to the passive voice. We've come to the end of the lesson. I hope you've understood what we've said in regards of the intransitive verbs. I find the intransitive verbs and the transitive verbs really interesting, because identifying objects, identifying the subject in a sentence is not a challenge, because you've been taught about these things over and over again. I'm just going to do a brief recap. And the main thing that I'll just mention is what we have said intransitive verbs are. So, most important thing is that they do not have objects. Instead, they are followed by words or phrases or even a clause that answer the question how, when, where. Those things, especially if it's a verb that is an adverb, that comes after the main verb, you refer to it as an adverbio. And you remember the different types of verbs that we discussed. Because you can say, she will come here. So when you say she will come here, she becomes the subject, come is the verb, here is actually an adverb, because it is telling us the place where she will be. It is answering the question where. So unlike the transitive, these ones are always followed by those things. And I've given examples where we have a prepositional phrase, where we have a clause, where we actually have an adverb. And then I've also mentioned that we have some unique verbs that can be used both transitively and intransitively, and I've also given examples. So it is up to you. Just understand this concept. Make sure that you understand. Do not just cram, because you cannot cram this. Make sure that you understand how a verb comes to be transitive and how another verb comes to be intransitive. In case you have any questions, you know what to do. And then please, as you listen to this lesson, make sure that you are keen. Avoid any form of distractions that you may have. Construct as many sentences as possible, and make sure when you construct the sentences, you break them down like we have done, that we have a subject, verb, and an object, or whatever it is that comes after the verb. It is only through that type of practice that you'll be able to understand these things. Please listen to understand. Don't listen to just cram. Listen to understand. Something that you don't understand, pause the video, repeat it as many times as you want. But just make sure before you come to the end of the lesson, you have understood what I've said. So I'm going to give an assignment here for you to try and exercise whether you have understood what we've talked about. So I'll clean this up. I hope you've written the notes. And where possible, if you have access to a pen of a different color, if you have a blue pen, you have a green pen and a black one, you can use them to write this. Or as you underline using a different pen from the one that you've written, so that you can see clearly. And because I am sure you have value of space, you can skip a line. After you write the sentence, skip a line so that you can show which is the subject, which is the verb, so that your work looks neat. English is about neatness. So make sure your work looks neat so that you can be able to revisit these notes sometime later. Handwritings must be neat. Yeah, let me start with the assignments now. So these are the instructions that in the sentences below say whether the underlined verb is transitive or intransitive. And then the first sentence, the hiker turned quickly towards the noise behind him So the verb that is underlined is turned. The second sentence, our teacher gave each of us another chance to take the examination. Verb that is underlined, gave. Number 3, after finishing the course, he was able to help at the VCT center. The underlined verb, finishing. And then number 4, our teacher gave each of us another chance to take the examination. Gave, I'm sorry, I think that sentence has been repeated, so you just do one. And then number 5, the president pushed through the crowd and shook her hand. Pushed is the verb that is underlined. And then her brother likes bananas, but she likes mangoes. Likes is the verb that is underlined. Make sure that you read the instructions, of course, and understand, and make sure that you do these assignments, because these assignments are not meant for me, they are meant for you, and they're meant to help you understand the concept that we learn. So if you make it a habit to always do the assignments, you will understand better, because you'll be able, as you answer the questions, you'll be able to find out the things that maybe you did not understand. I wish you all the best. See you during the next lesson. Bye.
Thank you for choosing to study with us. For more information, you can call us on 0724 173845.